prior testimony. Let's talk a little bit about how you can examine the expert witness with things they might have said in other environments. We're going to categorize it as prior testimony, but it can be any type of statement, any kind of writing, anything which might impact on their present testimony. Let's start with the obvious. Let's say that they had prior depositions that were taken. You want to find out how many depositions were taken, what depositions contain this content. Presumably, if you've done some discovery, you might even know what those cases were. You might even read them. You might have even highlighted them because you're going to ask questions later. But the concept is to understand, did they give any sworn testimony before this particular deposition? Let's get that food group. How big is that? And that's talking about prior deposition testimony, prior trial testimony, any affidavits. You can use your creativity. Again, the concept being that I want to ask them those questions. If you want to be deliberate and slow, ask them. Let's first talk about depositions. You indicated earlier that you had 25 depositions taken. How many depositions were taken that relate or are close to, or however you want to phrase it, that relate to the same types of opinions you're giving today? 4, 6, 23. However you frame the question, the key is what you want to do is now I'm taking the big box of all the depots and I'm squeezing it down. Now you have a sort of a tactical option here. You can either ask all the questions about prior testimony first, that is, tell me how many depositions you've taken, tell me how many affidavits you've done, tell me how many times you've testified. Okay, let's go through each one of those. Let's go through each deposition. What was the caption? What was the name? When was it taken? How long was it? Who was the lawyer? So forth and so on, if you don't already have that data. And then say, okay, of the 9 depositions, how many of them relate to an opinion based on a birth defect? How many of them relate to an opinion based on the stopping distance of a vehicle, etc.? And then you could squeeze that down. It's totally up to you in terms of the style in which you do it. The most important thing is that you get the whole box and then you squeeze down that box. That you get down to what is the core things that you need to talk about. But you've got a wide enough berth to make sure you've covered everything. So if the person says, okay, of the 10 times I testified, 4 of them related to an opinion on brain damage of a baby during delivery, and this is a case about that, okay, let's talk about each of those 4 cases. Or, can you please name those 4 cases? Or, I have them here. Or, what are the names of those 4 cases? What is the captions? Who did you testify for? Plaintiff or defendant? You know, what did you testify to? Or if you have their deposition already, or if you have their sworn trial testimony already, you might want to show it to them. So you testified in that case. Let me mark what's, plaintiff's number 23. And show you that and see if that's your testimony in that case. Or if you want an excerpt, the testimony that relates to the birth defect or the brain damage during delivery. Yes, no, whatever. I'm sort of helping them. I'm finitely drilling down because then I'm going to ask questions about it. If I don't know, maybe I'm just asking about it and later on I got to come back and take another deposition. But presumably, you will have that information produced beforehand, or you will have that information produced at the depot and you will have those actual deposition excerpts. If you've done it beforehand, you'll know what to ask them. And this is important because in the prior testimony department, you want to make sure that you've outlined what they've opined before, what they've sworn to before, because they may have opined something completely different. They may have opined something that's similar, but not exact. They may have opined that something in that opinion relied on a treatise that they're not relying on here. Something in that opinion relied on some facts that they're not using here. You can always find something. And that's why it's so important. So whether that person has prior depositions, prior trials, prior affidavits, or if you want to expand it, any statement of any kind, any opinion letter that relates to that in any particular case, whether or not the case went to trial, whether they were in practice and actually had this type of problem occur while they were delivering a baby, or they ever saw this problem, or they ever heard about this from other people, or they ever read it in a textbook. You can go as detailed as you want. The key is I'm capturing the prior testimony because I'm going to use it in some fashion. The person's never testified before. That also might be impactful because you might be in a trial where somebody's testified 368 times, but they haven't testified on this. For example, I had a case once where there was a forensic pathologist. That's a person who sees dead people. That's what they do. They opine it's the cause of death. And this particular pathologist was trying to opine on the cause of a particular injury, and we were able to really hurt him by discussing with the jury about he had never really rendered any expert opinions having to do with live people. And it sort of called into question whether or not he could take into account the same sorts of dynamics that he would when the body's lying there and he can perform tests. So you see, what we're doing is we're finding out the information so that we might be able to use it here. We're also avoiding having something come up later where somebody might say, hey, I testified 17 times about this, and you didn't ask that before. And it was the exact same thing, and it turns out it wasn't the exact same thing. So gathering the prior testimony and asking about that is a critical component of any successful deposition. Make sure that you've gotten all the information, that you've reviewed it, and if you have data and you have time and you can't excerpt it, you want to go through each one of those excerpts. In this case, you testified that this was negligence when the baby was delivered in this way. Okay? How does that relate to this case? How similar is that fact pattern to this case? It's identical. It's not. It's completely different. Okay, how is it different? How is it sort of similar? How is it? Because I'm going to use that later. Okay? I see in this particular expert opinion, in this trial testimony, you relied on Jones on anatomy. You relied on Jones on chemicals. You relied on Jones on birth defects. Why didn't you rely on it here? It doesn't matter what they said. You have a lot of questions. You see what we're doing? We're taking this through step by step. We're really examining them. We're seeing their consistency. We're seeing if they're fudging based on who they're being hired by, and you're creating a great dynamic to collect wonderful information to use in the expert witness deposition and at trial.